we have the start scene where we are introduced to a McDonald's restaurant, where you see the interior, you see some of the food products like soda, burger, fries, and beautifully close-up images of that. So it's an introduction to the context, which is a McDonald's restaurant.
McDonald's is kind of it's the biggest fast food chain in the world, and it's a very iconic one. And also, it's if you close your eyes and you think about a fast food chain, I think in most people's brains, the image of a McDonald's will come up. But I think the starting point is more to focus on the idea of this mass production of food.
What's happening now is that we see water sort of coming in under a door very slowly, in a very mild way, and slowly sort of water sort of filling up the McDonald's restaurant. Not in a dramatic way, but it's kind of slowly coming in. And the image shifts. You see that it's sort of spreading through the restaurant. It's the paper on the floor is starting to move, and now it's sort of covering all the floor, and it will slowly sort of raise. Of course, when you do something like this, you don't exactly know what happens, but still I would have to admit that most of what you see is also planned. Like every shot is scripted. You can't control the water, of course, and now I can see Ronald is starting to move. That was a little bit scary, actually, because it wasn't planned. Suddenly he's floating around, but he's not falling, and everybody thought it was kind of ghostly. Is Ronald sort of angry, or is it some kind of omen that we shouldn't do the film or something? But I would also say maybe that we shot this film around 2007, 2008, when there was a lot of sort of apocalyptic scenarios sort of going on. The financial crisis had happened, and there was all this sort of the end of the world rhetoric, and global warming was really kicking in, and Hollywood was making films about all of this. So we, I guess, wanted to make our version of it, which is, I guess, apocalyptic as well, but in a very sort of mild Scandinavian way. But still using sort of I guess, some kind of global vocabulary, the raising of the water, the most famous fast food chain. So it's very heavy in symbolics, almost sort of unbearably sort of Catholic punk. But it has this sort of humorous elements that, you know, are kind of slapstick as well. It's quite some years since I've looked at it, so it's kind of funny to see now. But it has different elements, I would say.
It is from scratch built restaurant, and all the details, more or less, are also built. So if you look carefully into it, you see many details where the little box for a Happy Meal, it's also handmade. So there was a whole team, including us, also sitting and hand making every detail and so on. So it is very detailed, let's say, crafted. Also, I think what really happened during the filmmaking was also that all of a sudden all of these elements become more and more characters. As Rasmus said, all of a sudden there's a Ronald McDonald floating by that becomes a very strong character in this. But every detail is a character because they are known characters that we then can use, and so it is everything is built, constructed. It's in a studio in Bangkok, and as you can imagine, it's rather complex to add so much water. So it's a fabrication, a construction.
It was a very complex film set. We had to basically build the setting for the restaurant, and then around that we built a pool, and then we had water trucks filling in water. But one thing, even though everything was planned, you can't move backwards. The moment you added water into the set, you can't go back. So, we planned a lot of things, but the moment you did one shot and the water is on this level, you could maybe stop the water, but you couldn't move backwards. So the set there was a lot of limitations in the set. It's interesting to see that in the beginning, when you see the start of the movie, we introduce the different objects, and in a way they're dead objects, and then slowly we add the water, and it's like a meltdown of this place, but at the same time, new life starts up. Like all these dead objects start to become actors, and they move around. And as Rasmus said, it's almost like slapstick sometimes when you see a cop moving into something else, and these small things becomes characters in the film. So in a way, the film has it's about a meltdown, and you should think it should stop at the end, because that's kind of the logic of a meltdown. It's actually the opposite is going on. At the same time, when you have a meltdown, there's more and more action. As you can see, the water reached the level of the tabletops. So soon you'll have the trays starting to move around, and the trash bins will also be moving around.
But maybe the irony of watching it now is also that it describes a sort of end of the world sort of scenario, and it uses Hollywood techniques in doing so. The way the production is staged and everything is the visual language is very Hollywood, I guess. At least that was the intention. But in a way, thematically, it seems very historic. And I have to admit that, the fact that, so this is a film about sort of the end of the world, in our kind of version of it, but shot with Hollywood techniques. But Hollywood has already gone much further than that. They are already in a sort of mainstream post-apocalyptic scenario. It's sort of agreed upon that the world, in a sort of fictional way, has already ended. And so many films and computer games are sort of on the other side of the end. So I think we need to catch up a little bit. So it could need an upgrade. And you see the debris sort of ganging up. The Happy Meals, the cups are starting to sort of move around in big pools. The fries are making the water dirty. You can see the oil starting to sort of grease out in the water, and the more and more debris. And now there's a sort of pan out where you will then get at this point like a sort of overview, and then very soon we will dive into the water, and we will be submerged in this sort of greasy, huge amount of debris. I think the whole film crew, including ourselves, sort of smelled of frying oil for like weeks after the production. French fries, and there was burgers, and there was food in the water. So, and that sticks to your body.
And now we basically see it's debris, and you can I think for many, I guess they also can make references to other situations where you have debris floating around. So I guess that's also one of the reasons why people also get attached to it. Here you have the coffee, but again here you have tons of brands, which are not only McDonald's, which are all other kinds of brands who are delivering or providing products, you know, Coca-Cola and so on and so on. And they all use a specific language that then all becomes submerged into this big pool of you know, branding and products that we are familiar with. We may go to McDonald's or not on a regular basis, but we recognize it.
But actually, this is kind of a point where we are back to the starting point in a way, where we are introducing these close-ups of things again, but when they have been submerged. So they've all been kind of modified by the water or changed by the water. But now they're introduced again, and they're moving. Before they were not moving.
We're in the underworld, where things are surprisingly sort of McDonaldized, but it has a strange sort of beauty imagery. Like the debris is, like, at this point of the film, very quiet.
The film has been shown many places, and by coincidence, quite often there has been a disaster in that specific country where the film has been shown. So it's part of a collection, and the film is part of a collection in Australia. And when they were showing the film, there was a heavy flooding in that specific city, and interesting enough was that there were a lot of films on the internet, on YouTube and so on, showing the disasters, the consequences of the disaster. So there's one clip that many used, also official media started using, of a McDonald's restaurant being flooded, and we got a little bit confused because it was actually our clip from our film that was used in some of these coverage, let's call them news coverages and so on. And I believe, if I remember correct, there was some Russian who had made that clip and sent it out as if it was, you know, reality. I think that is again an artistic, let's call it a trick, or artistic responsibility or choice, in that when you watch it, you also watch it in a setting that is almost one-to-one in scale. So you can very easily imagine yourself being in that place, and then the images, the way they are filmed and so on, is also each image or clip is almost let's call it a painting or a frozen image that is enchanting and makes you curious and more interested. I've heard kids crying and so on because it's there. You know, this is where we have birthday parties. What happened? McDonald's gets like all these characters, you know. All these characters that are part of the, you know, this playful world that McDonald's and many others create, they become so attached to, you know, kids and so on, and then all of a sudden it all floods. But as you say, people use a lot of time in it, and I believe that it's very much because it's familiar, but it's also disturbing, and it is in a scale that you very easily can portray yourself or see yourself.
The film kind of follows a very specific way of doing a narrative in films, where you introduce actors in the beginning, and then they start to act, and more happens. You pour some problems into the situation, and more happens, and at the end you try to solve things and cool down a little bit. So in that way, it's like moving through this kind of disaster, but ending up in this kind of like heavenish or whatever. Like you're in a calm situation at the end of it. So in that way, I think it follows a very like classical narrative of a film, but just being one scene.
And you have feeling of that in a second or two it will just completely stop or freeze, and then that is the end.